Hi folks, welcome to another episode of GeekFest. My name is Fani Reinders, and on today's show I'm going to share with you a few features that was added on top of WebAPIProxy. For those of you that are unfamiliar with WebAPIProxy, I urge you to take a look at the link posted below this video to read more about this project. But in a nutshell, WebAPIProxy extends our ASP.NET Web APIs, allowing us to expose our service metadata just like WCF does, and allow us to create strongly typed clients in C# and JavaScript. So moving on to the features that were introduced in the newer version is the support for Owen. Here we have an Owen Web API project. It is plain old Owen, nothing new. It's currently running on localhost port 9000, and when we run this, it will give us a message saying that the Owen server is running. So when we press any key, the server will stop. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to the Package Manager console and install the new version of WebAPIProxy to point out the changes. So when we open up the Package Manager console and type install package WebAPIProxy and hit the return key. In a minute we will see the packages install with all the dependencies. Now comparing this to the previous version of WebAPIProxy, the magic happened automatically on its own, but the newer version requires us to do one manual part, and that is to register the WebAPIProxy activation manually. We do this by going to the startup class, and wherever the configuration, the HTTP configuration is available, we just need to invoke a registration function. But first, we need to include the namespace, WebAPIProxy.server. And then, underneath the HTTP configuration instantiation, we call config.registerProxyRoutes. And that is it. Now when we run our service, we get a little message, and when we pop back into Postman, we will see our little API is running here. We can navigate to the default route. Now the default route for WebAPIProxy to serve metadata is API/proxies. Now we're not going to pass in any special headers. So without passing in special headers, one will get back the normal JavaScript client. So when I execute this, as you can see, there's the jQuery client that was executed. Just to recap, if I want to pass in a header called xProxyType with a value of metadata, and I send this again, I'll get back the actual metadata of the service. Previously, WebAPIProxy was only supported on IIS because it had a huge dependency on system.web, but now with the new version, that dependency was removed. That allows us now to host it on Owen-based servers. Now that brings me to the next point. We had a request in to have the ability to change our default route for serving metadata. Like I've mentioned, the default route is API/proxies. In the new version, it is actually possible to change that route to anything you want. Let me show you. So when we registered the proxy routes, when we open up the brackets, you can see it allows us to pass in a route template. The default is currently API proxies, but we can pass in anything here. So let's say, for instance, we want to pass in my/proxies. Now when I F5 to run the server, go back to Postman, when I execute this endpoint, it will fail because it's renamed. So now when I execute it as my/proxies, it will work again. So this functionality enables us to customize our little endpoints a bit more. Also in the previous version of WebAPIProxy, it wasn't possible for us to use the response of iHTTP action results, but now with the new version we support that. When we go back to our service and open up the birthdays controller, Here we can see that all the responses are HTTP action results. We can get around this issue by just adding an attribute called response type, specifying the type of response you want back. When that's there, WebAPIProxy will know what type it is expected and put it in the metadata. So let's explore the person class. I'm just going to F12 into this person class. As we can see, there's a constant called some useful constraint, and there's a relationship. If I F12 onto that, it is an enum. The new version of WebAPIProxy now has full support for constants and enums, as well as generics. As you can see, all over my class, I have this summary tags with documentation. Unlike the previous version, this wasn't included into the metadata. But now, when we go and execute this, it will pull through all the documentation of our model and our enums. As we can see here, on the model section, all the descriptions of each model is returned appropriately. So that pretty much sums up the server side of things. So now let's quickly take a look at the client side. So what I have here is a project called, or a solution called client that includes two projects, one for Windows 8.1 and one for Windows Phone 8.1. They are universal apps. I'm going to create a new project to this collection. Under the C# Windows Desktop, I'm going to point to the class library, but note this is a portable class library. Going to give it the name called Data Access, and we'll just assume the defaults on the portable class library dialog. Once some initiation is done, we are ready to roll. Let's go ahead and add WebAPIProxy C# to the project. We do this by going to the Package Manager console and type install package WebAPIProxy.C# and hit return. And after the dependencies and packages is resolved, we can check how the layout looks. So first and foremost, WebAPIProxy C# is now fully supported on portable class libraries, as you can see. The second thing to note is that there were some changes made to how it installs. Comparing to the previous version, there was only one configuration file in the project, allowing us to specify an endpoint, and it will do the magic at the background. But now, everything that we need is included in one folder called WebAPIProxy. In here we have the configuration file that everyone knows, and as well as the generated file, which is currently blank. Comparing to the previous version, the code generation of proxies happened every time you rebuild the project. This caused issues with build servers, etc. But now, this was attended to by making this functionality completely opt-in. I'll show you in a minute how that is done. So when we go to the WebAPI config configuration, we see that the proxy configuration has been cleaned up a bit. There was a namespace added for strongly typedness, and also you note that the other attributes are no longer required. The only thing that's required at the moment is an endpoint. That points to whatever your metadata exchange endpoint is. So currently, our metadata exchange endpoint is localhost 9000, but it's not /API/proxies. It is my/proxies. Just to make sure that the server is running, I'm going to tab over to the server side and run the server. Now, going back to the client side of things, when I rebuild the project, nothing really strange happens. When I go back to my generated file, it is still empty. So this means that our proxy generation either needs to be explicitly defined in the configuration, or we need to generate it on demand. So if you still want your proxy to be generated every time you build a project, there is an attribute called generate on build. We set this to true, and when we rebuild a project now, You see this, get this message asking to reload, and your client-side code will be generated. But on the other hand, some people might not prefer that way, that it generates every time the project builds. So by default, this setting is not included, and by default it is turned off. So now the generated code is included in the project, which gives you more control over your things you want to do. But it doesn't end there. WebAPI C# now contains the ability to generate your proxy on demand. I'm just going to go ahead and clear this file, save it, and close it, for instance. You don't have to close it, but just to give you effect. Now, we've added a new command onto the package manager console to enable us to generate code on demand. So this command is WebAPIProxy C#. When you click this, it generates new code. And when we go back to our generated code, the code is there to explore. There was a request recently that asked the generation of interfaces. Although this feature might come in the future, let me show you a workaround that you can use with Visual Studio as it is now. So, given our little proxy that was generated currently, it is generated under the WebAPIProxy's client's namespace. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that namespace. So what we need to do is pay attention to the clients. Note that the clients are generated as partial class. That enables us to create extension to these classes. So now it is easy to create interfaces from this. Just a note that if you modify this file, any changes to it will be overwritten. So best we do it in a separate file. So in WebAPIProxy, I'm going to create a new class. And I'm going to call it birthdays client dot partial, for instance. I'm going to fix the namespace because partial classes needs to be in the same namespace as the other one. And this needs to be public partial. Now, when we right click and say refactor and point to extract interface, it gives us this option of creating a new name and selecting which functionality or actions to extract. We're just going to go ahead with the defaults and click OK. And as we can see that the interface was extracted, the partial class was modified with the new implementation, and everything is good to go. That means now on our class, our initial class, it is easy that we can actually use our implementation as our birthday client. And use the dependency injection to inject the proper one. For now, I'm just going to use the concrete implementation. There are all our functionality. So as a takeaway, some of the features that we introduced wasn't much, but it's a powerful positive in the right direction, moving towards the new ASP.NET platform. We now have Owen support, we've got support for pullable class libraries, and we've got more control on the C# side of things, having your code included in top of your project. So that's about it for the show. Thank you very much for watching, and please subscribe to the rest of the content. You're welcome to visit my blog on farnyrenders.com, and where you will read more about the WebAPIProxy project. And if you can, please provide some feedback so that we can make this project even more awesome. Thank you very much. Cheers.